Hi, everybody. This is Katrina with Unit 2 of the Tarot for Real People class. We left off right here, having gone through a pretty deep look at the Major Arcana. That's not the last time we're going to visit the Major Arcana cards. It's just our deeper association of the interpretations and charting the Fool's journey through the Major Arcana. And we left it here, which is the world, which means mastering a challenge, closing a chapter, and starting over again. This refers us over to the Fool, which links together major events in our lives, major changes in our lives, major accomplishments in our lives, to connect the World card to the Magician card. That's why the Fool has no number. It's really almost like, if you can look up here, a jump ring that connects the cycles together. So we are going to move forward into what numerology means with the tarot. Now, there is an expansive study of numerology that is outside the scope of this particular class. The more you know about numerology, the more you can apply it to the tarot. But here is what you need to know. I will be uploading a page that gives you specific meanings for specific numbers. Those numbers are 1 through 9. And we don't work beyond those numbers because we are able to break down the numbers higher than 9 into smaller numbers. For instance, the Empress has a value of 3. That is her number value. The World also has a number value of 3, and this is why. It is a value of 21. We add the digits together. 2 and 1 equal 3. So break it down to its lowest combined number, and that is the number assignment that we give to the card. So in this case, threes means synergy. It's a synergistic effect that happens with the 3 cards, meaning that the sum of what's happening is bigger than the sum of its total. So the overall output is larger than what it should be. And an example of this would be a three-cornered stool. So we've seen stools that actually have 3 legs, or I say three-cornered, I meant 3 legs. And theoretically, that probably shouldn't be able to stand. A tripod probably shouldn't be able to stand, and yet it does and can be quite stable. So that's just an example. I'm going to, as I said, upload a page that talks about the meaning of each of the numbers. So if this were a 14, that would actually be a 5. If this were an 18, it would actually be a 9. So always look at the number of your minor and major cards. Of course, your court cards are not going to have this. And if you see a predominance of a certain number in a reading, then you know that that number is providing a prevailing energy into the situation of the client at that time. So just very briefly, here are some of the ideas, and this is what I'll be uploading for you. Ones mean a new beginning. 2 means partnership or balance. 3s are synergistic changes or synergistic outcomes, creations, and overall sacredness. This comes from the idea of the Holy Trinity. 4s mean stability. 5s are kind of an unstable place to be. It's a time of transition, and it's an initial conflict in a situation. You can think of something being a fifth wheel as being just out of place. 6 is resolution and problem solving. 7 is reflection, assessment, discovery, reconsideration, looking back on a situation and deciding, evaluating. 8 is movement and action. 9 is attainment. It's wisdom. It's awakening. It's a near completion. And then 10 actually is the completion. And 10 in and of itself reduces back down to a 1, which is a new beginning. So this will be uploaded as its own document so that you have that available for your references. Now, when we are looking at these individual cards, you can see that there's a lot going on. And in other decks, even those that are based on these Pamela Coleman Smith drawings or illustrations, you can see even a lot more going on. Some decks are extremely detailed. And even in this very simple Rider-Waite illustration, you can see that there's a lot going on, and there's more going on than what you see at first glance. And that's why it's important that when you really study these cards, you look at them deeply and find the narrative that's involved with each card. So notice the little details and find your narrative. Let's start with the Magician. Now, the overall meaning of this card is as above, so below. The will of heaven manifested into manifestation on earth. So look at the details of this card. Now, we're going to talk in a little bit about colors. So I'm not going to address the colors at this time, but the colors are important in each of the cards. What I do want you to see is that this figure has got one hand up to heaven, one hand down to earth. This figure, the Magician, is the go-between of heaven and earth, meaning that the person involved, or the person that the Magician represents, is living a sacred moment, that they have the ability to take the will of heaven and manifest it onto the earth. There are lilies here, which is a flower of purity. This reflects the purity of intent of the person. It means be careful of how you use your energy and make sure you're working in a highest good, because you're acting as a sacred vessel at this time. Also notice that on the table, the Magician has one of each of the suits. There's a cup, a pentacle, a sword, and a wand. And that means that the Magician has everything they need for success at their disposal. The Magician also has an Ouroboros, a self-consuming snake, that is around the waist. This means the infinity of life and death, birth and rebirth, and the ones and the tens, the zero that connects them all. Up here, you can see that the Magician has an infinity sign over their head, meaning that life and death, birth and rebirth, the never-ending cycles are always what informs the decisions that the Magician makes. So there's a lot going on with that. It's a very busy card, but really, when you look at all 78 cards, they are all super busy if you take the time to really pick them apart and get them to get to know them. Now, I have read cards for around just over 35 years, and I'm still finding things in these cards that jump out at me. And one of the reasons that I'm so bitchy and insistent on having a Rider-Waite based deck to work from is so that we can all be looking at the same images. What you do in your own practice is up to you, but for the purpose of this class, I want us all to be seeing the same thing. Now let's look at the Hanged Man. The Hanged Man represents immobility, an inability to move forward. However, look at the details of this particular card. The person is suspended upside down by their right ankle. They cannot move forward. And yet, look, they still have a holy halo. They are still a sacred being. They are not showing any sign of distress, even though they're all akimbo here. The face is not tortured. They're just waiting. They're waiting for what happens next. The legs form a number 4, and 4 is a sign of balance. And it's saying, be balanced, be calm, and wait. This is not a time to move forward. Now, if this card were reversed, what we would see is a person who's trying to move forward and is going to keep falling down because it's inappropriate for them to move at this time. So this is a card of advice, and it's a card of reassurance that even though you're not feeling the ability to move forward, that's good, because now is not the time to do so. Those are two of our major arcana cards for a really detailed narrative. Let's go to a couple of our minors. The Two of Pentacles. You have a juggler who's moving 2 pentacles up and down through the infinity loop. The juggler is not looking at the waters behind. The waters are very treacherous. They're very busy. We've got this ship back here that's tossed on the waves. We've got something else going on here that's really hard to define, but we can see that these are very rocky waters. The juggler themselves has 1 foot up and 1 foot down. So they are juggling their own body in addition to this, trying to find balance. And so the Two of Pentacles is all about achieving balance and working on the aspect of balance without paying attention to the hurricane that's going on around them. Now, let's say you throw this card down and what draws your attention is that little ship back there. That might mean that this is, in the particular reading, a card of travel, or that the ship is being tossed on some heavy seas, and that what the client needs to do is turn their attention to achieving balance amidst the chaos. So Cards can mean a lot depending on what catches the eye of the reader, not the client, but the reader. It's your reading. You're doing the reading for the client, and what you're seeing in the actual imagery. Here's another picture to kind of pick apart the Eight of Cups. The Eight of Cups is about a spiritual retreat. It's about a retreat that is not based in logic or not based on making a concerted, objective decision. It's about knowing that you need to move and moving forward, despite what anybody else thinks and despite all appearances. Right here, we've got somebody walking away from 8 full cups. They're doing it at night in the light of the moon. That means using instinct and intuition rather than what is seen in the sunlight that is perfectly clear. They are leaving this solid ground over here. They've gone through the water. Water always represents intuition or emotion. They've gone through that. Now they're on the other side and they're walking to the mountain that is unseen. This means leaving the known, the safe, and the assured for something unknown for a higher purpose, because it's what you know you're supposed to do, not because it makes any sense at all. So let's look at a few more cards. Notice the details. Find your narrative. What's happening with the figures in these cards? Now, there are a couple of decks that are very interesting. You might want to explore once you really get the hang of the tarot. One is called the After Tarot. In the After Tarot, and you can see these if you just go to Google Images and type in quotations After Tarot, you can see images of these cards. And these cards show what would happen in the next frame of each of these cards. So we see what would happen after the star pours out everything that's there. What would happen after these coins are given? What would happen after this person realizes that they're restricted? There's another one called Tarot of the New Vision, and that shows each of these cards from the exact opposite perspective. So it shows them as though you're standing behind the figure pouring out the water. What is she seeing? Behind the merchant here, what are they seeing? What is from the opposite perspective? And those are really neat expansions of the classic Rider-Waite images. So let's go on to noticing the details and really getting to know these cards. Here we have this person who is completely vulnerable. That's what nudity represents in the tarot, is freedom and vulnerability. And so they're not hiding anything. Everything is in full view. This person has 1 foot on land, 1 foot in the water. This person is pouring fluid into the water and pouring fluid onto the land. There's a little tree on a hill back here. There's a mountain back here. And it's the card of the star. So, of course, there's a star there. This also plays into the mythology of the Star of Bethlehem, which led the wise men to the birth of Christ. And the whole point of the star is creating a goal and moving forward in a balanced way. This means combining magic, which is the fluidity of the flow onto the water, into intuition, and mundane work, which is watering the land for fertility and for growing things. So here we have the Six of Pentacles. This is about having enough to do what you need to do. We see that the scales are balanced. We see we have 2 people begging this merchant for money. He gives to one and he's turned away from the other. This means to be very discerning in where you give your resources, including your time, your energy, and your money. Here we have the Eight of Swords. On the Eight of Swords, we see a woman who is enclosed in swords, which mean opposition, swords mean danger, and swords mean obstacles. So she is surrounded by challenging stuff, bad stuff. She's standing part on land and part on water. Remember, water is emotion, water is feeling. She's blindfolded, so she can't see what's going on around her. She can't see that there's a house or a castle back here in the background that possibly could lend assistance. She's restrained as well, so she can't move. What this means is there's a way out right here in front of her, but she can't see it. And she's afraid to move forward because there are swords and obstacles and danger everywhere. On the other hand, if she took in a breath These bonds look very loose. They could fall aside. She could remove her blindfold and walk out. So often the Eight of Swords represents a self-imposed restriction where you're not using all of your resources to gain release. This is the Six of Swords. Again, swords represent opposition. You'll see that the river person is carrying, the boatman is carrying a huddled figure and a child into a journey of some kind. Almost always the Six of Swords is going to represent a trip or some kind of movement. It could be movement from one job to another, one office or desk to another, one house to another, or it can mean physically taking a trip. But also look at the fact that these waters over here are troubled. The waters they're moving toward are smooth. So it always represents leaving a bad situation and going into a better situation. The Five of Wands is about competition. It looks like these guys are just beating the shit out of each other with these wands, but it's actually about friendly competition. And it means that what's happening is not life-threatening. It is simply uh, a matter of competition and of finding out who's top dog. So that's a different way of looking at what looks like combat. It's actually a friendly competition. So for the next part, let's move forward into some first reactions. Look at these cards and think about what your reaction is. What do you feel when you see this card? Now you can see this person has 3 full cups here. They even have a cup being presented by God out of the sky, and they still have a pissy ass look on their face. This means, number one, being discerning about what comes your way, but it can also, depending on the cards around it, mean being ungrateful and thankless for what you receive. So this is one of the times you want to look at the other cards and see what they're supporting in regard to your interpretation of this card. Here's another first reaction. Look at it. Think about what you see. Now, on first glance, we see a person carrying a very heavy, cumbersome load. Their back is bent, they're leaning into the effort, and they're putting a lot of stride into what they're doing. These things look like they could just go anywhere at any moment, and one arm is holding the top, one arm is holding the bottom. But look at what it's showing. They're almost home. So they've probably come a distance carrying this, and now they're almost there, and they can do it. This is achievable. And so the suit of wands is about energy, and the 10 would be the culmination of that experience. And so we've got a person who is finalizing a project that was a lot of hard work, and they're almost done and can lay down their burden and rest at home. Let's do 2 more of these. Well, let's do 3 more. Here's another first reaction, the Ace of Cups. Look at it. What do you feel? What do you think? This is an overflowing of what? There's the water. It's emotion. Lots of emotion. Lots of intuition. Usually good emotion because it's coming down blessed by the dove of peace. We've got the little yods floating around here. We've got the hand of God delivering this emotion to you, falling onto the ripples of the lake, showing that this emotion has far-reaching effects. So this is a good, positive, wonderful first start of emotion. 9 of Pentacles. This is a woman alone in her garden. She seems content. She's got her happy little bird there on her hand. She's protected, and she has affluence around her. She has coins. She has grapes, which represent abundance and harvest, and she's in a good place. And so this tends to represent a person who has almost everything that they need. It's a 9, so we're nearing completion, and it's a time of attainment. She has pomegranates all over her robe, which are also a sign of abundance. And so it's about almost being there, almost finding that achievement. Let's do 1 more of these. Have a look. The 7 of Pentacles. This is about resting, a momentary break in work. This is about a person who is looking at what they've harvested or what they're working on. They're evaluating it. They're seeing how the harvest is going to continue if their efforts are going well. This is a person leaning on their hoe. They've probably been working for quite some time, and now they're looking back to make sure the row is straight and to make sure that they're working in accordance to what the harvest needs. So this is a card that encourages evaluation. It encourages thoughtfulness about what we're doing and where we're investing energy and how we can do a better job, or if we just need to continue as we are. Here are a couple more ideas that I want to go into for this particular class. Watch for your repetitions. When Pamela Coleman Smith did the drawings, she did a lot of similar figures. And I think this was intentional. I don't think this was just her lack of experimentation with different figures. I think she meant to do this. For instance, if you'll notice, the figures on the Lover's card are the same figures as are enslaved on the Devil's card. The Angel for Temperance is very similar to the person who is adapting on the Star. So you'll see that there are a lot of repetitions throughout the tarot images. Let's look at this one. We've got the Magician who is channeling the will of heaven onto earth. And now we have a person in similar clothing walking away in search of spiritual fulfillment. We have the Chariot, which is forward movement, divinely driven, strong movement. And then we have almost the same figure for Justice, which is balance and karmic relief or karmic achievement, karmic balancing. So watch for some of the same figures to show up, even crossing between the major and the minor arcanas. Some of the cards that you come across, you may have noticed in your positive and negative reactions, are kind of difficult cards. And they can even be scary to the client, especially if the client is coming to you at a time of distress. These are what I see as some of the most difficult cards in the deck to work with. Now, you always want to be very frank and honest with your client about what you're seeing. And the fact of the matter is that tarot cards cannot predict death. They can predict the circumstances that would look like death, such as a total change, a complete need for readjustment, um, feeling bereft and out of touch. I mean, sure, if you were going to die, you might get a specific reading, but it's very rare that a reading is going to come to you that means that someone is going to die. It could mean that someone could die, but it doesn't, you should never treat it as an absolute. In fact, there isn't really anything in a tarot reading you should treat as absolute. When you're doing a reading, you're freezing a moment in time and saying, if nothing changes, this is what things look like moving forward. You're actually interpreting a message the client is sending to themselves, and you are merely reading the language of the tarot back to them. So often what you share with a client is going to feel very familiar to them because they already know it on some level and conveyed it through the cards to you. That's why it's so very important to really get good at knowing the language that the tarot speaks to you so that you can convey that accurately to your client. And there's no shame in having a little book or a set of prompts with you to do your readings. I even write readings, as you can see, or interpretations, as you can see, on the card itself, just to give me a little spur of the primary idea of the card. So let's look at some of these more difficult cards. This card is one of real pain, and it can get pretty ugly in some other decks. And this one, they kind of left out a lot of the blood and the gore and such. But this is a card of separation, of pain over being away from someone that you love and care about. So if you're asking about the future of a relationship and this comes up as an outcome, it's okay to tell the client that it looks like at this point the relationship is not going to continue, or that you're at least going to have some time apart. The Devil card is really triggering for some people who buy into the Christian mythology, and it can be good to hurry and tell them that this is not about the Christian devil, even though that's what's depicted here. It's about the demons from within. It's about your own demons that keep you from achieving success. It's about your demons that keep you enslaved to a life that you don't want to live. And it usually involves something like addiction, addictive behaviors, or any other type of repetitive behavior that does not serve your greatest good, or relationships that do not serve your greatest good. Death is one of the scarier cards, and it actually means profound change. It means that things are going to be totally different than what they are now or what they were before. It means death of the old and birth of the new, because every death brings a rebirth. You'll notice that the Pope here is trying to buy off death. This person on their knees refuses to even look at death, and the little child is the one that in some depictions actually is handing a flower to death and making friends with death. The white of the rose on death's banner indicates a purity of intention of death, that death is not here to judge, death is just here to create change. The Ten of Swords is a real tough one because, man, it almost always just means straight out betrayal. Someone has just stabbed you in the back. And I have a friend that, actually a mentor that taught me to read tarot, that called this Bad Day at Red Rock. And it really is about, just taking it in the back and the potential of someone to really do you dirty. This is another hard card for people, and it means impoverishment or being impoverished, but it also means not availing yourself to the resources that could help you, because there's a church window very deliberately placed right beside them, and they're avoiding looking at it and moving forward. So sometimes this can mean self-imposed impoverishment or a refusal to do the things that would help you out. So let's now look at some of our colors and what they mean. There are three primary colors that we address in the tarot, and one of the most prominent colors is red. You'll see red deliberately placed throughout, especially the clothing of different people, their robes, their hats. And red means passion. It means, what are you passionate about? And when we look at the magician, we can see that he is cloaked in passion. Now, one of the ones we don't go into a whole lot, I've just done the main three, but white means purity. So that's not one that I've gone into in depth, but we can see that we have the purity of his intent reflected in his robe and in the lilies that are around, but his cloak is red. So that also informs what he's doing. We also have the white of purity around his head, meaning even his thoughts are pure and fueled by the passion of the red. You'll also notice that there are red flowers intermingled with the white flowers. So it's a fine balance of passion and purity that is firing the motivations of the magician. Here we have the student, and this is a student who is wearing red on his head. So he is studying what he is passionate about. He's learning what he's passionate about. Here we have the spiritual retreat. So even though this person is walking away from the known good, from the solid and the secure, to go to the mountain on spiritual retreat, they're doing so with tremendous passion, not only all around their chakras up here, but on their feet. So they're actually walking away with tremendous excitement and passion. The Hierophant is about conventionality and how society sees us and how society presents, and that's almost all red. So that means that this was a secret language of saying that society is fueled by the passions of society and the fervent, pious belief of society. You can see that the red very much overpowers the white of purity in the Hierophant, as opposed to the magician, who has a nice balance of red and white. We have this card of celebration, the Three of Cups. We've got one person who is celebrating all impassioned. We've got another person celebrating from a point of purity, and we have another person whose purity is being cloaked in some way. So this is a fun celebration with everybody having different types of motivations going into it. So you can see from some of these cards already that yellow is a very prominent color, and yellow means joy. Yellow means release, and yellow means health and balance. And so we see yellow in the background, especially of a lot of our happier cards in the deck. This one is a card that means discernment, knowing what to take with you and what to leave behind. And the yellow lends a whole different atmosphere to this than it would if the background were gray or black. If it were gray or black, we would have more of a feeling of escaping something or dismay. But because it's yellow in the background, we have a feeling of happily grabbing what you need and moving forward with your little red hat of passion and your little socks of passion as you're moving along. Strength is about taming the beast within you and knowing when to shut the hell up and when to speak. But the yellow behind it lends a sense of joy to it, of healthy restraint, healthy self restraint, as opposed to restraining because you feel somehow compromised or you feel inhibited. This means, no, I'm growing, I'm learning, and I'm growing up and becoming an adult who knows when to speak and when to move forward. This is a card of the harvest home, which means joy and celebration over a happy harvest and a stable home. So, of course, the yellow is appropriate. The Nine of Cups means a wish granted. We've got yellow above and below and all over the cups. And in the Nine of Pentacles, we discussed before, we have a very yellow background, again, indicating the joy of that independence. Black is another strong color that's used usually in the very challenging cards. The Nine of Swords means almost always the person is not getting enough sleep. And usually it's because they're riddled with some sort of anxiety. And so the black denotes a negative connotation to that. The Five of Pentacles we discussed before is riddled with black. The Tower, which means destruction of what exists right now in favor of building something better. The Devil card has a lot of black. There's a balance of black and white and gray, in fact, the blending of the two in death, meaning that we are going to mourn what we lose, even as we get something better. So, what are some of the myths surrounding the tarot? This is going to be the last thing we discuss on this particular class before we move forward for next time. This is just because as you begin to do readings, which is one of the things we're going to do in the group this particular month, you may have people who are popping up with some of their own myths, and I want to dispel some of those or possibly reinforce some. Number one, a lot of people believe that the tarot is an instrument of the devil, and it really is just cards. It's cards that spark an intuitive and a psychological reaction in us. We don't know exactly how they work, but if you believe in the construct of the Christian devil, you have to wonder if the devil is about enlightenment, because that's what the tarot cards provide. They provide enlightenment and they provide clarity of vision into a situation. When we're looking at the tarot, we're looking at a distilled analysis of the circumstances away from this flotsam and jetsam of emotion that gets all layered on top of what we feel and what we think. The tarot will cut right down to the chase and tell you exactly what's going on, away from the contaminants, if you want to say that, of emotion and our own will of what we want to have happen, what we want to be so. If a person wants to consider that kind of enlightenment to be something from Satan, that's on them. My impression is it's not from the devil. It's about the ability to see clearly and understand what you're supposed to be taking away from this experience. And that being said, it's kind of interesting I chose the card of illusion, the moon, to illustrate this. Some people believe you should never buy your own deck, that it should only be given to you. Not true. I've bought hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of decks for myself and never had any kind of fallout from that. I think that's really, I don't even know where that came from, because no, it's perfectly fine to buy your own deck of cards. Some people say you should keep your cards in a pine box, in a silk cloth, in a crystal box. It doesn't matter. You can keep them in the box they came in. You can put them in a fancy box you've got. You can put them in a fancy bag you've got. The cards will tell you what they want. They'll let you know how they want to be stored, and you just pay attention to your cards and see what they want you to do. No one except you should touch your cards. Sometimes this is true. You don't want everybody coming along manhandling your cards. If you feel comfortable with someone that can touch your cards, clients can touch your cards, but nobody else needs to be all up in your tarot card business. Especially if you've got kids with little sticky fingers and they just want to look at the pretty pictures and throw your cards everywhere. Respect your cards enough to keep them out of the fray. I like to store mine with a crystal to keep the energy around them pure and clean. This says never use a used deck or never read from somebody else's deck. You know what, kids? I'm a witch. If I can't clean out a deck, I got a problem. So I've worked with many used decks, and I have borrowed decks with discrimination as to whose deck I was using. I don't want to use the deck of somebody I don't love and respect. But at the same time, a deck is a deck. So I clean it out before I go in. I clean it out after I'm done, and it works fine. When you're cleaning a deck, we'll discuss that a little bit later in the class as to how exactly to do that. For now, just know that if you give it a really good shuffle and put the cards in order and then shuffle it up, it'll be nice and clean. This says you should never read cards for yourself. This is kind of half-assed true. The reason is because, and yeah, you can read for yourself. That's the way we all start, is by reading for ourselves. But we tend to glamorize a reading. We tend to dismiss things we don't want to see. We tend to transmutate what we see in the reading into something we want it to be. And it's very difficult to be objective for ourselves. That's the only reason that we shouldn't read for ourselves. If you're comfortable just practicing on yourself, go right ahead. But if you're really looking for guidance, make sure you're stepping aside and going into your objective self when you do the reading. Make sure that you are reading um, for yourself in the way you would read for someone else. Always use a reading cloth. I like to if I don't know the surface. If I know the surface I'm working on, I don't use a reading cloth. But I like for there to be a known surface between me and the card, or between the cards and what's happening. Always or never charge for a reading. There shouldn't be any hard and fast rules. You know, doing cards for somebody is a service. Doing a reading for somebody is a service. You're not forced to do that without recompense. So if you have reached a point that you feel that what you're doing is marketable, don't hesitate to charge for a reading. If you're not there yet, don't charge somebody for a reading when you're just a novice. Make sure that you're at a level of comfort with your own abilities before you start charging for a reading. Don't charge for a reading and then whip out your little book of interpretations. You need to be dialed in before you're asking somebody to pay money for a reading. As far as never charging for a reading, there are people who believe that you should never charge for magic. I don't believe that. I think that often, if you're not charging, people tend to take advantage of you. As soon as they know you can read cards, you're going to have people begging you to do readings. It's just like when you are that one aunt that cuts hair and you go to the family gatherings and you've always got to cut somebody's damn hair. Don't be surprised if once you get to parties, you get to gatherings, somebody says, "Oh, Cheryl does cards." And all of a sudden, Cheryl's got to do 10 readings in a row because people just want one more reading. No, don't do that. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later, but truly don't be forced into doing readings you don't want to do, and don't feel uncomfortable charging for your skill once you have a skill. Last thing is never read for skeptics. This is also kind of a back and forth yes or no thing. It's a pain in the ass to read for skeptics. They automatically start to think you need to prove something to them, and that contaminates their process. I'm not saying everybody that you read for has to buy in completely to what you're doing, but if they're sitting back with their arms crossed and this shitty look on their face, that's not what you're looking for. It's going to contaminate your process. You're going to feel like, "Oh, really, buddy?" and start to want to prove something to them, and that is not the motivation we go into for a reading. So that's all that we have for this month's class. We're going to pick up here for next month's class, and we're going to be discussing some of these concepts in the study group, as well as starting to put out cards for which people can give their individual interpretations. As we move through this month as well, I would like for people to start throwing their own readings. I would like for you to put down 1 or 2, maybe 3 cards in response to an issue that you would like to address. I'd like for you to take a picture of it with your phone and post it on the board so that people can look at that and you can say, "I was trying to make a decision about what to do in regard to my job. These are the 3 cards I got. What do you think?" And then let each different people in the group respond so that we can begin to practice. So that's where we're going on this. Your homework for the coming week is just to be interactive on the group. Pay attention to the posts that are going up and respond, or at least take note of the information that's there. I hope this class helps you and has opened up the decks for you a little bit more, and we're going to explore that even further on the next month's class. Take care, everybody.